Shanghai. Shanghai, one of 4 cities of the Central Submission of the People's Republic of China, located in the delta of the Yangtze River in the east of China, the important cultural center of the country and also the world's largest seaport. Besides, Shanghai is the largest financial center of China, advancing Beijing and Hong Kong, and one of leaders in East Asia and the world, after New York, London and Tokyo. According to a census of 2020, 24,870,895 people lived in Shanghai. Following the results of 2021, the volume of foreign trade of Shanghai was 10.09 trillion yuans, $1.58 trillion US. Goods turnover of port exceeded 47 million too, and the international airport Pudong served more than 32.2 million passengers. The first mention of this name belongs to an era sung, the 11th century, when there was already confluence to Yangtze and Huangpan settlement with such name. There are disagreements concerning interpretation of this name. The official Chinese historiography treats it as sea epicourses beach. Opinion of Haiji Shangyang. However, other reading, especially in northern dialects, assumes literal value. To enter at the sea, that is to put out to sea, that quite would be suitable for the seaport. In Chinese, Shanghai registers in abbreviated form as Hu, as Shen, they. The first option comes from the old name of the river Kuzhu, to the harm, Hudu. The second, on behalf of the Chusky nobleman Chun Shenxian, Chun Shen Jun, literally Mr. Chunshen, living in the 3rd century BB, which lands included the territory of modern Shanghai and who was esteemed in these parts as hero. At names of the Shanghai teams and newspapers often there is a hieroglyph. Shanghai also sometimes is called Shenqing. Opinion of Shencheng, city of Shenzhen. In the Western languages, Shanghai had many other names. Among them, there is East Paris, the Queen of the East Pearl, and even the Whore of Asia. For revelry of defect, drugs and prostitution in the 1920th, the 1930th years. GSE. Nominal Shanghai in Russian invalute disorder, KS, and also English to Shanghai. Having hocussed, to send the sailor to swimming. Aimer, to achieve something by unfair means or coercion. To the east from Shanghai there is the East China Sea. Shanghai is divided into 2 parts by the Huangpu River, inflow of the Yangtze River, located in the southern part of the delta of Yangtze. The most part of a city area of Shanghai is on the west bank to Huangpu Sea. While in east part Pudong is built the new business area. Shanghai borders on the provinces of Zhejiang and Jiangsu. Shanghai has a humid subtropical climate with lines of monsoonal. There is no accurately expressed damp and dry season, though rainfall drops out in much more summer. To Shanghai extremely seldom it is snowing, usually no more than 1-2 days in a year. In Shanghai, 4 seasons, short but rather cold winter. It is necessary to consider that Shanghai is almost on the 30th parallel, that is at the latitude of North Africa, at the south of the USA. At these latitudes there is practically no winter. Short and fast spring, long and hot summer, and quite long fall, which in Shanghai lasts conditionally till December, are expressed. In the winter, temperature often falls below zero. An average temperature in July and August is 32 C. A historical minimum and a maximum of temperatures, respectively, 10 C and plus 41 C. At the beginning of summer usually there are heavy rains. In the spring weather is very changeable, rainfall with frequent temperature differences is frequent. The summer, a peak tourist season, however, in Shanghai is very stuffy at this time, in view of high humidity. In the fall in Shanghai it is usually solar and dry. The leaf fall is observed in November. In the winter in Shanghai cloudy weather prevails, there are returns of heat or small frosts. Within a year several typhoons can fall upon the city. However, typhoons of the last years didn't cause extensive damage, though led to temporary closure of the airports and insignificant damages of municipal economy. Before becoming the city, Shanghai was a part of the county of Songjiang, under control of the Suzhou Justice. Since times of the Empire of Sun, Shanghai gradually became brisk seaport and the administrative status outgrew. Songjiang today, only one of the districts of Shanghai. In 15 times of swimmings of Zhenghe. Liujigang, located about 35 km, was the main seaport in the mouth of Yangtze, is higher on the Yangtze current from Shanghai, in the territory of the modern province of Jiangsu. Subsequently, however, he lost the value because of silting by river deposits. In 1553, construction of a fortification marked the emergence of Shanghai as the city's. About 1600, the Jesuit Matteo Ricci mentioned Shanghai as the important city. However, till the 19th century, Shanghai nevertheless wasn't among the most important cities of the country, and unlike other cities of China, in few historical sites. In the 19th century, the role of Shanghai radically changed as strategic position of the city in the mouth of the Yangtze River made it the perfect place for trade with the West. During the First Opium War in the first half of the 19th century, sometimes Shanghai was held by troops of Great Britain. War terminated in 1842 in signing of the Nanking Contract, according to which a number of contractual ports, including Shanghai, opened for foreign trade. Under the original Protocol of 1843 and the Chinese-American Vanshiaski Contract of 1844, the Western powers acquired the exterritorial rights, which action actually became invalid by the end of the 1930s, however officially was cancelled only in 1943. During the revolt taken of in 1853, Shanghai was captured by the Triad under the name Society of Small Swords, which emitted from insurgents. During fights, a rural part of Shanghai was destroyed, however foreign settlements weren't damaged, and Chinese sought to get to them in search of a safe shelter. Till this time, to Chinese it was forbidden to lodge in these areas, but this restriction was cancelled in 1854. Then the earth price considerably increased in them. In 1854 also there took place the first annual meeting of the Shanghai Municipal Council, which problems included management of foreign concessions. In 1863 the settlements of Great Britain and the USA, which were located on the west bank to Huan respectively on the southern and northern sides of the river of Suzhou, united, having created the Shanghai International Settlement. France kept from participation in municipal council, having kept the independent status of the French concession, which was to the west of the international settlement. The fucking Chinese War of 1894-1895 for control over Korea was ended by signing of the Shimonoseki Contract. Then Japan was also among the foreign powers having the settlement in Shanghai. Japanese constructed the first plants in the city. Soon other countries followed their example, having laid thus the foundation for development of the Shanghai industry. Shanghai gradually became the largest financial center of the Far East. At the time of board of the Republican government in 1927, Shanghai received the status of the special city, and in May 1930, the cities of the central submission. During the Second fucking Chinese War on January 28, 1932, the Japanese fleet subjected Shanghai to bombing, which stated purpose was a suppression of students' performances against the Mukden incident and the Japanese occupation of Manchuria which followed them. In 1937 the Japanese army with fights captured Shanghai and established puppet government there. The city remained in hands of aggressors before the capitulation of Japan in 1945. During World War II, Shanghai became a shelter for refugees from Europe. It was the only city in the world, certainly open at the time, for Jews, the victims of the Holocaust. However, under pressure of the German Allies on an Axis at the end of 1941, Japanese imprisoned the Jewish immigrants of Shanghai in ghettos in which infectious diseases, such as dysentery, began to extend. On May 27, 1949, Kuomintang troops handed over Shanghai to communists. Then within 10 years the majority of the cities of the central submission were included in structure of the neighboring provinces. However, Shanghai and Beijing kept this status. Within this decade, borders of Shanghai several times underwent changes. After the city was occupied by communists, offices of most foreign firms were transferred from Shanghai to Hong Kong. However, development of the city continued, and during the 1950th and 1960th, Shanghai turned into the important industrial center and also base of the left forces in the CPP. Despite it, even in the most gloomy and restless years of the Cultural Revolution, Shanghai managed to keep the high level of industrial production and relative social stability. Throughout the most part of history of existence of the People's Republic of China, Shanghai remained the largest source of tax revenues in comparison with other provinces and the cities. It seriously affected development of city infrastructure and capital construction. Importance of Shanghai for maintenance of stability of receipts in the budget also affected that it wasn't allowed to Shanghai to begin economic liberalization in the mid-80s as it was made in the southern province of Guangdong. During this period, the Central Treasury practically didn't receive taxes from Guangdong, and therefore he was ruled out acceptable from the fiscal point of view for carrying out risky economic reforms. Shanghai got permission to begin reforms only in 1991 after economic experiment in Guangdong and other provinces was successful. Since 1992, the central government, headed by the former mayor of Shanghai Jiang Zemin, began to conduct a course of gradual reduction in taxes in Shanghai for attraction of foreign and internal investments, with an ultimate goal to turn Shanghai into one of the economic centers of East Asia and to strengthen its role as gate for foreign investments into China. Since then, the economy of Shanghai grew with a speed of 9–15% a year, the highest rates among other regions of China. According to a census of 2000, the population of all territory of Shanghai, including not city area, meets 16.738 million people. Also entered this indicator temporarily living in Shanghai, which number makes 3.871 million people. Since the previous census of 1990, the population of Shanghai increased by 396 million people, or 25.5%. Men make 51.4% of the population of the city, women minus 48.6%. Children up to 14 years make 12.2% of the population, the age group 15–64 years minus 76.3%, elderly is more senior than 65, 11.5%. 5.4% of the population of Shanghai are illiterate. In 2003 in Shanghai there were 13.42 million officially registered inhabitants. Even more than 5 million people live and work in Shanghai informally, from which about 4 million seasonal workers, generally from the provinces of Jiangsu and Zhejiang. The average expected life expectancy in 2003 made 79.80 years. Men minus 77.78 years, women minus 81.81 years. At the end of 2007, the population of Shanghai having a constant registration made 13.79 million people. 79 million people had a temporary registration. The total population with a constant and temporary registration made 18.58 million people. The share of elderly people as aged more senior than 60 years made 20.8% from the general population of the city. According to official estimates for December 31, 2009, the population of the city made 24.632 million people, including with constant registration made 19.213 million people. Besides, the migrants with temporary registration living in the city over 6 months, there were 5.419 million people. The number of such migrants who were officially considered by statistics grew by 77.8% from 3.05 million people in 2000 up to 5.42 million in 2009. Most of the population of Shanghai speaks the Shanghai dialect of Chinese. The Shanghai dialect belongs to group of dialects at. In Shanghai there are also dialect distinctions, however, as a rule, they are extremely insignificant and don't influence mutual understanding. At the same time, the Chinese who isn't speaking on any of dialects at won't be able to understand almost anything on Shanghai. Scope of Shanghai is limited to oral communication, and official language is the standard dialect of the Chinese Patanku. The modern Shanghai dialect is a result of mixture of various dialects at Suzhou, Ningbo and other nearby regions from where within the 19th–20th centuries in Shanghai there arrived a large number of immigrants. Today almost all residents of Shanghai aged up to 50 years speak on a Patanku fluently. Foreign language skills also depend on age group. Thus the elderly indigenous residents of Shanghai who got an education before revolution, and also youth aged up to 26 years which studies English from elementary school know English. The political power in Shanghai always traditionally was considered as a springboard to higher posts in the government of the People's Republic of China. Many present functionaries of a party top in Beijing grew up from the Shanghai administration in the 1980 years. The known criticism of extremely left methods of cultural revolution and the nicknamed Shanghai clique adhering to the right views carried the Chinese President Jiang Zemin to her and a premier of the State Council of Zhu Rongji. Many observers saw opposition of administration of Hu Jintao in the Shanghai clique, which is drawn towards the right views. In the administrative relation, the status of Shanghai is equated to the province, and posts of the secretary of a city-town committee of the CPP and the mayor were always considered in China as the last step before ascension in the top party management. Four mayors of Shanghai, including Jiang Zemin and Zhu Rongji, held important posts in the government subsequently. From March to October 2007, Xi Jinping headed the Shanghai City-Town Committee of the CPP. At the same time, the decision on appointment to posts of the mayor and the secretary of a city-town committee is accepted by the central government. It is necessary to mention also mayors of Shanghai of the Republic of China who also held the large leading state posts in the country. This is Wang Fu and Zhang Kan. The secretary of the Shanghai City Town Committee of the CPP, who was earlier holding a post of the mayor of Shanghai, Han Zheng, openly calls for transparency in actions of city administration. The complex system of a relationship between city government, banks and other civil organizations led to charges of corruption from Beijing more than once. However, in most cases business was limited only to statements. On September 24, 2006, the secretary of the Shanghai City Town Committee of the CPP, Chen Liangyu, was displaced from the post and charges of corruption and waste of public funds were brought to him. Many observers regarded it as the sign to heads on places which refused to carry out the directives of Beijing directed to cooling of superheated Chinese economy. Carried to such heads also Chenlong Juja. Armed Forces. In Shanghai, the large naval base of East Fleet, the ship repair enterprises of East Fleet, the Second Military Medical University, Institute of Nuclear Researches, the Shanghai Engineering Institute on Development of Submersibles, the Shanghai Control Center of Space Flights, the 57th Scientific Research Institute NOC. Institute of Electronic and Telecommunication Technologies. Division 61398 headquarters are located. The city of the Central Submission Shanghai is divided into 16 areas. In Shanghai there is no uniform city center, functionally that is divided between several areas. Business centers of Shanghai belong to Lujiazui on east coast, Wanpa, Bunda and Hongqiao on western. The city meeting and city administration are located in the region of Huangpu, which is also the shopping area, including the well-known Nankinskaya Street. Other large trade zones also include the elite region of Xinjiang, the Anhui Lu Street near Luan, and the zone Zuyui near Zui. Most of the universities of Shanghai are located in residential zones of the areas of Yanpu and Puto. Modern Shanghai is divided by the Huangpu River into the western and east coast, according to Puxi and Pudong. Thus, it is the historic center of Shanghai. East River Bank to Huang became a new economic zone, a symbol of China of the 21st century. It consists of 1 areas of Pudong. Economy. Shanghai is a financial and shopping center of China. Market reforms in Shanghai began in 1992, for a decade later than in the southern provinces. Before, the most part of income of the city went irrevocably to Beijing. Even after decrease in a tax burden in 1992, tax revenues from Shanghai made 25% of receipts from all China. To the 1990th, this figure made about 70%. Today Shanghai the largest and most developed city of continental China. In 2005 Shanghai became the world's largest port for goods turnover volume. 443 million tons of freights. At the beginning of the 21st century between Shanghai and Hong Kong, bitter struggle was started for the right to be called the economic center of China. In 2003 DDD per capita in Shanghai was 46586 yuans. About $56.20, putting him on the 13th place in the list of 659 cities of China. Among advantages of Hong Kong, there are stronger legal system and much bigger experience in bankings and services sector. Shanghai has strong communications with the central government and other regions of continental China and also more powerful production and technological base. After the handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997, the role of Shanghai in the financial and bank sphere and also as the place of basing of head offices of the companies amplified, warming up demand for educated and modern labor. Since 1992 the economy of Shanghai grows annually more than for 10%. In 2005 nominal DDD of Shanghai grew by 11.1% and was 912.5 billion yuans. $114 billion. In 1990 in Shanghai the Shanghai Stock Exchange, the first in the territory of continental China, was created. After reforming of the stock market in 2005, stock market capitalization strongly increased. Now the Shanghai Stock Exchange is the modern and respected by investors platform. The Shanghai Future Exchange is among the leading commodity exchanges of the world on the trading volume future contracts for natural rubber and copper. The Shanghai Exchange of Gold, the largest exchange of China on trade in precious metals. Also in Shanghai there is the international platform for trade of coffee. As well as many other regions of China, Shanghai endures a construction boom. The modern architecture of Shanghai differs in a unique style. For example, the top floors of high-rise buildings occupied with restaurants in a form remind UFOs. One of symbols of Shanghai is the skyscraper of the Shanghai World Financial Center called in the form opener. Skyscrapers Shanghai outnumbered Hong Kong, which was a part of China. The sources and specified 2385 days. Their main center is the region of Pudong. In the city the highest is constructed in China and the world's second 128-story skyscraper, the Shanghai Tower. The majority of the buildings which are under construction today in Shanghai represent the high-rise houses differing on height, color and design. The organizations responsible for planning of development of the city, now more and more attention are paid to creation of green zones and parks within housing estates for improvement of quality of life of residents of Shanghai. That quite corresponds to the slogan of the World Fair of the Expo 2010 Shanghai. The best city, the better life. On June 30, 2009, the 13-story house under construction fell in Shanghai, near Minhang, and I didn't collapse after falling. This unique phenomenon didn't receive unambiguous justification among experts. As versions moved forward, degradation of soil, a mistake at design or construction of an underground garage on incorrect norms. As a result, one person, the 28-year-old builder from the province of Anhui who didn't manage to leave the building where came behind tools, died. Historically, Shanghai was very westernized, and now it undertakes a role of the main center of communication of China with the West more and more again. One of examples of it is opening of information center on exchange of medical knowledge between the Western and Chinese institutes of healthcare PACMed Medical Exchange. In Puduna, houses and the streets very similar to business and residential areas of the modern American and Western European cities are located. Nearby there are large international trade and hotel zones. Despite dense population and a large number of visitors, Shanghai is known for very low crime rate in relation to foreigners. In Shanghai, the highest minimum wage in the People's Republic of China is established. Since July 1, 2021, the minimum wage in Shanghai for the workers occupied full-time makes 25.90 yuans. $406.23 a month, whereas for the workers occupied part-time minus 23 yuans. $3.61 an hour. The gross regional product of Shanghai grew from 2.69 trillion yuans, about $415 billion in 2015 to 3.87 trillion yuans in 2020. At this RP per capita exceeded $23,000 of the USA. Following the results of 2020, RP of Shanghai grew by 1.7%, though in the first quarter 2020 he dropped by 6.7%, and for the first three quarters 2020 decreased by 0.3% in comparison with the same period of 2019. The volume of foreign trade increased by 2.3% year-on-year, and retail sales of consumer goods were 1.59 trillion yuans, about $246 billion. That is 0.5% more in comparison with previous year. On this indicator, Shanghai wins first place among all cities of China. The volume of direct foreign investments exceeded $20.2 billion, that is 6.2% more in comparison with previous year. Besides, in 2020 in Shanghai consumer price index grew by 1.7% year-on-year. In the city 570,000 new jobs were created, and unemployment rate remained within 4.4%. Operating income of the sector of the software and information services increased by more than 12%. As of 2021, Shanghai was in the lead on consumer spending per capita, advancing all other cities in the provinces of China. Following the results of 2021, RP of Shanghai grew by 8.1% year-on-year and reached 4.32 trillion yuans. The volume of actually used foreign investments grew by 11.5% year-on-year and reached $22.55 billion. Key industries of the industry of Shanghai are production of integrated circuits, biomedicine and the sector of artificial intelligence. They are followed by production of cars, vessels and the power equipment. In Shanghai automobile plants Tesla, SAIC Motor, including the Shanghai Volkswagen and Shanghai General Motors plants. For Jifeng Truck, Neo and Airways Automobiles, the bus plant Sun Long Bus, Comac Aircraft Building Plant, the aircraft repair plant Boeing, the plants of SMIC, CES, Seiko Instruments, Diodes Incorporated, Huahong Grace Semiconductor and Shanghai Huali Microelectronics Semiconductors, the plants of computers, computer accessories and Inventec, Kingston Technology and LG Electronics Consumer Electronics, the plant of Sunny Optical Technology Optics, Biosteel Steel Works, engineering plants Shanghai Electric Group and Shanghai Zhenhua Heavy Industries, the plant of ABB Robots, the plant of Toshiba Elevators, Petrochemical and Sinopec Shanghai Gaoyao, Sinopec Shanghai Petrochemical, Hengyao Petrochemical, BASF, Bayer, DuPont, Coltex. Mitsui Chemicals, Xenergy, Huntsman, Henkel Group and WAP Chemical Plants, the plants of the telecommunication equipment Ericsson and Nokia, Karl Stores and Covidian Medical Equipment Factories, the plant of the road building Sandvik Equipment, dairy factories Bright Food and Want China International Paper Mill, the plant of the containers Shanghai Simpao Well Industries are located. Military Industrial Complex. In Shanghai, the large defense enterprises and research establishments of China are located. The Go. The Shanghai Academy of Space Technologies. Rocket Plant No. 149 and the plant of electronics of the 9th Go division of China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation are distinguished from the largest. Information Technologies. In Shanghai, the most popular Chinese video hosting of Bilibili. More than 220 million active users. Is based. Following the results of 2020, Shanghai was visited by 236 million internal tourists, and his internal tourism revenue was 281 billion yuans. The main tourist center of Shanghai is the Shanghai International Resort Complex, in which amusement park the Disneyland and the Shanghai International Musical Village are located. In 2016-2020, the complex earned over 40 billion yuans, about $6.16 billion. It was visited by more than 83 million tourists, including in 2020 over 14 million. In Shanghai, many world retail chain stores, including supermarket chains and hypermarkets Auchan, Carrefour, Tesco, Metro Cash and Carry, Costco, Walmart, Sam's Club, networks of clothes and the Marks and Spencer footwear, network of perfumery and cosmetics of Sephora are presented. The largest shopping centers of Shanghai. Global Harbor, 480,000 m. Ekri Taiku Hui, 321,000 m. Super Brand Mall, 121,000 m. Shanghai Efi Mall, 110,000 m. Bailian Ziao Shopping Mall, 109,000 m. Grand Gateway, 102,000 m. Public catering. As of the end of 2021 in Shanghai, more than 3.2 thousand coffee shops worked. The city is the largest center of consumption of coffee in the country. Financial services. Shanghai, the center of concentration of banks, largest in the country, insurance and finance companies. As of the end of 2021, more than a third from nearly licensed financial firms in Shanghai had foreign investments. Following the results of 2021, the trading volume in the financial market of Shanghai grew by 10.4% year-on-year, having exceeded 2,500 trillion yuans. About $394 trillion. In Shanghai, several types of zones of development are located. Economical process areas. Shanghai Minhang Economic and Technological Development Zone. Minhang. Shanghai Hongqiu Economic and Technological Development Zone. Changning. Shanghai Pudong Economic and Technological Development Zone. Pudong. Zones of new and high technologies. Shanghai Xinjiang High Tech Park. Pudong. Shanghai Kaohsiung New Technology Development Zone. Zui. Shanghai Kaohsiung High Tech Park. Zui. Kaohsiung Pujiang High Tech Park. Minhang. Shanghai Jiading High Tech Park. Jiading. Shanghai Fua New and High Tech Park. Jiading. Export Zones. Shanghai Jinkyo Export Processing Zone. Pudong. Shanghai Kaohsiung Export Processing Zone. Minhang. Shanghai Minhang Export Processing Zone. Minhang. Shanghai Jiading Export Processing Zone. Jiading. To Shanghai Qingpu Export Processing Zone. Simp. Shanghai Songjiang Export Processing Zone. Songjiang. Shanghai Fengpu Export Processing Zone. Fengjian. Shanghai Hui and Shanghai Petrochemical. Chemical and Petrochemical Industry. Shenergy Group. Power and Gas Industry. Shanghai Industrial Holding. Highways, water supply, real estate, cigarettes and polygraphy. Waxiaptek. Pharmaceutics. Shanghai Joinbai Group. Real estate, trade and foodstuff. Shanghai Media and Entertainment Group. Massachusetts Media Exhibitions. Tourism and Hotel Business. Shanghai Disney Resort. Amusement Park. Bank of Shanghai. Banking. Shanghai International Group, Haitong Securities, Guotai Junan Securities, and Everbright Securities. Financial Services. Glorious Property Holdings and Shanghai Forte Land. Real Estate. Jinjiang International, Huaishu Hotels Group and Home Inns Group. Hotel Business. Aiden Services. Business Services. Bosiden International Holdings and Metersbonmi Group. Production and sale of clothes. Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation and Founder Technology Group. Electronics. Pudong Zhongga Shipbuilding. Shipbuilding. Shanghai Zhenhua Heavy Industries. Cranes and Steel Structures. Bright Food, Shanghai Liangyu Group and Uni-President China. Foodstuff and Drinks. Wison Group. Construction and Engineering Services. Shanghai Airlines, China Cargo Airlines, Spring Airlines, Juniao Airlines and Yangtze River Express. Air Transportation. China Shipping Group, China Shipping Container Lines and China Merchants Energy Shipping. Shipping. Shanghai Film Group Corporation, Oriental DreamWorks, and Chinese Entertainment. Film Production and Animation. Shanda and Ubisoft Shanghai. Video Game. For the first 11 months 2020, the volume of foreign trade of Shanghai was 3.15 trillion yuans. About $481.6 billion US, having increased by 2.2% year-on-year. Export made 1.25 trillion yuans, increased by 0.5% year-on-year. and import minus 1.9 trillion yuans. I increased by 3.4%. The European Union, 620.4 billion yuans, growth by 4.2% year-on-year, 7% of all foreign trade turnover of the city. The USA, 440.4 billion yuans, growth by 6.9%. And ASEAN, 434.4 billion yuans, growth by 2.4%. Was the main trade partners of Shanghai. The volume of import of high-tech products to Shanghai grew to 625 billion yuans, that made 32.8% of the total volume of import of the city. Growth by 10.2% year-on-year. Import of integrated chips made 270.3 billion yuans. Growth by 13.7%. The volume of export of electromechanical products from Shanghai reached 857.8 billion yuans, that made 68.8% of all export of the city. Growth by 0.5%. Foreign investments into Shanghai in 2020 exceeded $20 billion. Through the end of 2020 in Shanghai, there were about 60,000 companies and the enterprises with foreign investments, which provided more than a quarter of gross domestic product of the city and more than a third of his tax revenues. For the last 40 years, the volume of actually used foreign investments in Shanghai exceeded $270 billion. In the territory of the city were located 767 regional headquarters of multinational corporations, that is the highest rate among all cities of continental China. As of summer of 2021 in Shanghai, 791 regional headquarters and 488 research centers of multinational corporations were based. In the first half of 2021, the volume of foreign trade of Shanghai increased by 19% in annual terms to 1.88 trillion yuans. $291 billion. The volume of export of the city grew by 9.6% to 703.78 billion yuans, and import for 25.4% to 1.18 trillion yuans. The share of private enterprises in foreign trade of Shanghai made 27%, 508.31 billion yuans. And the enterprises with the foreign capital minus 61.8%. 1.16 trillion yuans. Turnover of trade of Shanghai with the European Union made 384.38 billion yuans. In 2021, the volume of foreign trade of Shanghai reached 4.06 trillion yuans. About $640 billion. Having increased by 16.5% year-on-year. The volume of export increased by 14.6% in comparison with 2020 and was 1.57 trillion yuans, and the volume of import increased by 17.7% to 2.49 trillion yuans, that resulted in trade deficit of 917.3 billion yuans. Foreign trade with the European Union reached 806.93 billion yuans, having increased by 15.8% in annual terms and having made 19.9% of the total amount of foreign trade of Shanghai. Commodity turnover volume with the countries of ASEAN reached 538.08 billion yuans, 13.2% of its total turnover of foreign trade of the city. With the USA minus 508.12 billion yuans, 12.5%. with Japan minus 411.56 billion yuans, 10.1%. Export of machine building and electrotechnical products of Shanghai reached 1.08 trillion yuans, having increased by 14% and having made 68.7% of the total cost of export of the city. 57.01 billion yuans were the share of export of cars. Following the results of 2021, export of cars made 484,000 units of Shanghai, plus 136% year-on-year, and their total cost minus 57.01 billion yuans, about $8.95 billion US, plus 206% year-on-year. The essential share in export is occupied by cars with electric and hybrid motors. More than 30% of the exported cars were the share of the markets of the EU, Australia and Shanghai. The main articles of export: electromechanical products, cars, sea cargo vessels, containers, clothes and footwear. The main articles of import: integrated chips, clothes and sewing accessories, leather and fur products, cosmetics and personal care products, food and drinks. Agriculture. Despite high urban saturation, in Shanghai the agricultural land on which peasants grow up grain, vegetables, fruit, flowers, houseplants, seedling and various aquacultures remain. City authorities attract considerable investments into clever farms, with the high level of process automation. Transport. In Shanghai the modern transport system and, unlike many other large cities of China works, city streets are kept clean, and Shanghai surpasses many other large cities in air quality. The daily report on air quality in 84 largest cities of China. The inaccessible link. It is archived on May 5, 2010. At the same time, in comparison with other world megalopolises, air pollution in Shanghai is quite considerable. The system of public transport in Shanghai violently develops. In the city more than 1,000 bus lines. Many municipal buses are transferred to biofuel. The share of electrobus steadily grows. The Shanghai subway contains 19 lines, including 5 completely automatic transfer lines, and more than 510 stations. In 2019 the subway transported 3.88 billion passengers. As of the end of 2021 the total length of network of the Shanghai subway reached 831 km. Shanghai is the oldest trolleybus system in China and in the world from current. The Shanghai trolleybus was started up on November 15, 1914, while in the rest of the world the oldest of the trolleybus systems operating till this day, Philadelphian. 1923. And in other Chinese cities trolleybuses appeared in the 60th to 80th years. Since 2004 in Shanghai the first ever commercial railway line acts on a magnetic pendant. Her and also the train moving on her was constructed by the German engineers of the Transrapid Company. The line possesses a speed record in real operation with passengers minus 430 km/h. The line connects the city to the Pudong airport. The train overcomes distance in 30 km in 7 min. 21 seconds. Shanghai is served by 2 airports. The Hongqiao Airport and the International Airport Pudong, which cumulative passenger traffic concedes in China only to the airport of Hong Kong. As of 2013, the Shanghai port, including new deepwater port Yangshan, was the world's largest. As of 2019, the Shanghai port kept the leadership among the largest container ports of the world. The Yangshan port, located at a distance from the continent on the archipelago of the same name, is connected with the city Donghai Bridge, 32.5 km long. In the city, the large terminal on intake of Ellen, joint venture of the Shenergy Group and China National Offshore Oil Corporation companies, is located. In Shanghai, 3 railroads connect. Railroad 2, Beijing, Shanghai, passing through Nanjing. The Hakan Line, connecting Shanghai and Hangzhou. And also Siyun Line, between Sishanim and Ningbo. In Shanghai there are 5 stations: Hongqiao Station, Shanghai Station, Western Shanghai Station, Southern Shanghai Station and Songjiang Station. Freight rail transportation along a route China-Europe connecting Shanghai to Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Poland and Germany is important. High-speed highways include the 2 highway, Beijing-Shanghai, and also network of modern highways around the city. The 36-kilometer bridge which connects Shanghai to the Ningbo industrial zone is built. His construction is ended in 2008 and it became the longest sea bridge in the world. Also there are ambitious construction plans of a highway from a city area on the island of Chongming. In the city many streets are duplicated by the platforms which are crossed at the different levels. Internal and external automobile belt roads are constructed. Plus and Pudong connect several tunnels and bridges. Culture. In the first half of the 20th century, Shanghai became the cultural and economic center of East Asia and was perceived as the place of emergence of all the most modern in China. Exactly here China's first car and the modern system of the sewerage appeared. Shanghai also became the field of intellectual fight between socialist writers adhering to critical realism, Lu Xun, Maidan, and more bourgeois, romantic and focused on aesthetics authors, Shi Zikan, Xiao Zunmi, Yi Lingfeng, Zhang Ailing. Besides literature, Shanghai also became a cradle of modern Chinese theater and cinema. In Shanghai, the first Chinese short film, Difficult Spices, 1913. And the first Chinese art movie, a story about how the orphan saved the grandfather, was shot, 1923. The Shanghai film industry reached blossoming by the beginning of the 1930th years. In it there were stars which compared to Marilyn Monroe, for example Zhu Juan, who ended life suicide in 1957 after the end of World War II and the revolution which followed her. Many Shanghai figures of cinema emigrated to Hong Kong and made a huge contribution to development of the Hong Kong cinema. Considerable part of the Shanghai culture of the time after the revolution moved to Hong Kong together with the numerous emigrants running from revolution. Life of little Shanghai community in Hong Kong is shown in the movie Love Mood, shot by Wong Kar-wai. Also Hong Kong resident of Shanghai. And nostalgia of the director of his childhood is felt from time to time. In the movie, the song performed by Zhu Juan also sounds. Inhabitants of other regions, as a rule, describe residents of Shanghai as the mercantile, self-confident and haughty people haughtily belonging to provincials. At the same time, residents of Shanghai are an admiration subject thanks to their careful attention to details, conscientious implementation of arrangements and professionalism. Many Chinese have a belief that male residents of Shanghai usually err under a heel at the wives. In these words there is an element of truth. His Shanghai husbands often at the same time carry out duties of the supporter, the father, the cook, the plumber, the carpenter, etc. Immigrants. Very small share of today's population of Shanghai are descendants of residents of the old city, which is once enclosed with a fortification. Ancestors of almost all present residents of Shanghai immigrated to Shanghai from the neighboring provinces of Jiangsu and Zhejiang at the end of the beginning of the 20th centuries. In the Shanghai culture of a turn of centuries, mixture of cultural elements of these two regions is very well shown. It was reflected also in the Shanghai dialect. However, despite these distinctions, residents of Shanghai always had very pronounced feeling of consciousness based on the cultural and economic superiority proceeding up to revolution. Years after the revolution became heart-rending experience for Shanghai as the central government began to pursue leveling policy and to fight against bourgeois remnants, which center, according to many, was Shanghai. It led to a vicious circle. Residents of Shanghai began to look at other residents of the country as own provincials, while other Chinese began to consider them haughty and petty. Recently this trend only amplified due to inflow of a new wave of the immigrants from all China who aren't speaking a local dialect and using a Patanko, official language of the People's Republic of China, is a lingua franca. 3 million people for only 1/2003. Residents of Shanghai connect with this influx of migrants. The sources and specified 2292 days rise in crime, persuasive begging and congestion of infrastructure, mainly public transport and schools, recently, and it generates additional tension in society. Residents of Shanghai easily define visitors. The sources and specified 2292 days, and the last often become subject to discrimination, deliberate and unintentional. All this leads to further misunderstanding and strengthening of stereotypes in consciousness of residents of Shanghai and residents of China outside the lower Yangtze current. Old buildings in style also one of features of the Shanghai culture. It is, as a rule, two or three-storied city estates enclosed with a high brick wall. In the yard of the estate and between houses there pass the direct avenues lanes called London, giving the name to areas of such houses. Shikimans incorporated various elements of the Western and traditional Chinese architecture of the lower Yangtze current. Fashion. Among the other cultural phenomena which arose in Shanghai, Qianzi can also note the modernized option of a traditional Manchurian Chinese women's dress. Qianzi for the first time began to carry in Shanghai in the 1910 years. These clothes emphasized symmetry of the woman. Below the dress had long cuts along legs. The dress sharply contrasted with a traditional tsipo, hiding a figure. Qianzi carried together with the Western coats and a scarf, and this image became some kind of symbol of Shanghai of the time and all East Asian modernist style in general. The Western fashion changed. These changes affected also Qianzi. The dresses closing a neck without sleeves, dresses with sleeves in the form of handbells and lace from a black tape on a dress edge became fashionable. Now 1940th years the corsage of Cheongsam began to be done of the transparent black material decorated with beads, including of a velvet. A bit later checkered fabrics became fashionable. In 1949 together with revolution the era of Cheongsam and fashion in habitual understanding of this word ended. However, in the last decade the fashion industry again in high gear gained steam. In Shanghai at least once a week there takes place the fashion show. As well as in architecture, the Shanghai designers try to create the style based on synthesis of the Western and traditionally Chinese motifs. Sites: Cathedral Zuyui, Sheshan Basilica, Bolshoi Shanghai Theatre, Eastern Orthodox Church, Domshikamen in which there took place the first National Congress of the Communist Party of China, Sun Yat-sen's House Museum, Chiang Kai-shek's House Museum, House Museum of the Tsinsky Deputy and General Li Hunshana, Mosque Songjiang, Mosque Zhoudouiyuan, Memorial Complex of Lu Zhen, Bridge Ring, Weighton Embankment, the Beijing Opera Inn, Shanghai, Wenmia Market, Flower Market and Birds on Xianjilu Street, the Market of Dresses on Changolu Street, the Market of Antiques on Dongtaelu Street, Gardens Yuyuan, Synagogue Akol Rachel, Cathedral Dunciado, Cathedral Zuyui, St. Ignatius Cathedral, the biggest Catholic temple in Shanghai, the ancient cities on the river of Shijiazhou and Choshisha on the outskirts of Shanghai, Lungquasis Temple, the biggest Buddhist temple of Shanghai, is built during Troyetser's era. Jade Buddhist Temple, Temple of Jingin, Church of the Good Shepherd, St. Iosif's Church, St. Pieter's Church, Blessed Virgin's Church of Maria Nebesno, a monument of the Neo-Byzantine architecture, St. Teresa's Church, Shanghai World Financial Center, Shanghai Museum, Shanghai Center of East Art, Power Plant of Art, the Museum of Modern Art. The first Russians in Shanghai appeared in the middle of the 19th century. It were merchants, dealers in tea for whom Shanghai became the important transit point of import of tea to Russia. Besides, the Russian ships constantly came into the Shanghai port. Therefore in 1860 in Shanghai there was a freelance Russian consul, and in 1896 the regular Russian Imperial Consulate General was founded. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Russian voluntary fleet established a regular steamship line Vladivostok, Shanghai. The number of the Russian residents of Shanghai increased at this time approximately to 350 people. Data of 1905. And during the pre-revolutionary period significantly didn't change, being about 3% of the total number of foreigners in the city. Significant changes happened to the beginning of civil war in Russia. In the first months 1918 in Shanghai about 1,000 Russian refugees appeared. In December 1922 the Russian population of Shanghai sharply increased with the arrival to the mouth of Yangtze of a squadron of the Admiral Stark which on the outdated warships which aren't adapted for transportation of passengers took out thousands of refugees from Russia. In Shanghai Russians there were more than 6,000. Further, the quantity then grew at the expense of immigrants from Manchuria, generally from Harbin. In the mid-30s, Russian and Russian-speaking more than 20,000 lived in Shanghai. Russians were then the biggest foreign colony in the territory of Shanghai. They lodged, generally in the territory of the French concession and one of her central streets, Avenue Zofra. The modern name, Weihai 2H Channel. In a local popular speech was called the Russian and French concession, the Russian as there lived Russian 4 times bigger than the French. In Shanghai, the Russian language newspaper, Shanghaiskaya Zarya, what wrote the Shanghai immigrant newspaper 70 years ago about, began to be issued. The 1920th years became the heaviest for the Russian immigrants. Russians lost consular protection, and together with it and the right of exterritoriality. That is now the Russians who made offense have to be judged under the Chinese laws. The Russians who got into difficult financial position didn't shun any works, absolutely not prestigious for white Europeans, and many of them, having saved heavy work some means, began the business, and some very succeeded in commerce. From 1926 to 1928 only on the Avenue Zofra Russians opened about 20 department stores, grocery stores, 30 shops of outer garments, tens of other trade institutions. Thanks to them, this street became the most brisk in Shanghai after Nanjing. In 1933, Russians possessed more than 1,000 trade and other enterprises. With improvement of material living conditions, care of preservation and development of the Russian culture appeared. The 30th years became the period of blossoming of the Russian culture in Shanghai. In the city began to work the Russian drama theater, ballet school consisting generally of Russians, the Shanghai Municipal Orchestra, which was originally called by Orchestra of the French Concession, AN. Vertinsky moved to Shanghai from Paris. Here F. Shilipin went on tour. In centenary anniversary of death of A.S. Pushkin at the expense of the Shanghai Russians on crossing of streets Penyan and Taoijiang was built the monument to the poet, which is twice destroyed and twice restored, and being the only monument to the foreign literary figure in China. In Shanghai, the famous Soviet and Russian jazz musician Oleg Lundstrom started the career. The Russian community in Shanghai strongly differed from communities of emigrants in the Western countries. Unlike Europe and America, where the Russian white Russians, who were usually knowing not one European language, often were quickly dissolved in the local environment, in China, there was a unique situation when, in many respects thanks to language and cultural distinctions with the local environment, the Russian emigrants could not only keep, but also transfer to younger generations Russian culture mentality. From the beginning of war on the Pacific Ocean, December 1941, Japan occupied the territory of the international settlement and the French concession, and after war the outcome of Russians from Shanghai, whose one part was repatriated in the USA, 8,000 people, began, and another 7,000 people through the International Refugee Organization was evacuated to Philippines and further dispersed over the third countries, generally as settled in the USA. On it the history of old Russian Shanghai ended. Today there are several hundreds in a varying degree constantly living in Shanghai, Russian and Russian speaking. Generally it is the businessmen, students and other Russian citizens and citizens of the CIS countries who consciously arrived to Shanghai. Old Russian residents of Shanghai in the city of Unit, the majority after 1945 went to the Usura on the west. After closing in 1962 of the Soviet consulate and the beginning in 1966, Cultural Revolution in Shanghai had no more than 10 people from among the former White Russians and the Soviet citizens who arrived after 1949. This situation began to change only in the late 80s. His former building on confluence of Kuzhu and Tuhuan was returned to the Russian consulate. By the way, Russia the only country which consulate occupies the certain building in Shanghai. In the 1990th to Shanghai after rapid economic growth the Russian businessmen stretched. Near Shanghai and in adjacent districts of the provinces of Jiangsu and Zhejiang the set of the enterprises is located. In Shanghai various industrial exhibitions are often held. All this attracts businessmen from Russia and the CIS countries. In the Shanghai higher education institutions many students from Russia, including according to programs of inter-university and interstate exchange, generally learning Chinese study. More than 10 years the Aeroflot Russian Airlines company carries out regular flights between Moscow and Shanghai, and since 2005 along this route the China Eastern Airlines began to carry out flights also. In February 2007 the Transero airline began to carry out direct regular passenger air transportation along a route street. Petersburg, Shanghai. In 1998 in Shanghai the Russian club putting the task to restore traditions of a cultural unification of Russian-speaking community of Shanghai opened. For today of course, there can't be a speech about fully to recreate all for what the Russian colony in the 1930th years was famous. The Russian newspapers, theaters, etc. However in club meetings of the Russian diaspora are regularly held, there take place cultural actions, in process of the opportunities it assists in cooperation with the Russian Consulate General to compatriots, holds religious services. In 2004 with assistance of club from the Sacred and Nikolaev Temple and the Cathedral in honor of an icon of the Mother of God Sporochnitsgoty, constructed by the Russian emigrants in the 1930th years pleasure institutions were removed. Although it isn't necessary to speak about renewal of services by Orthodox priests as it will contradict the Chinese legislation banning the activity of the foreign religious organizations in the territory of the People's Republic of China. However, on assurance of the Ambassador of China of Russia Liu Gachin, further buildings will have the cultural appointment connected with the history of the Russian China. Education. Fudan University. Tongji University. Is Shanghai University of Transport. It is founded in 1896. Medical School at the Shanghai University of Transport. The former Second Shanghai Medical School is founded in 1896. The Fudan University. It is founded in 1905. Medical College at the Fudan University. The former Shanghai Medical University is founded in 1927. The Tongji University. It is founded in 1907. East Chinese Pedagogical University. East Chinese Polytechnical University. Donghua University. Shanghai University of Foreign Languages. Shanghai Financial and Economic University. Chinese European School of the International Business. Other state. The Second Military Medical University. Shanghai Pedagogical University. East Chinese Political and Legal Institute. Shanghai Conservatory. Shanghai Theatrical Academy. Shanghai University. Shanghai Institute of the Marine Transport. Shanghai Power Institute. Shanghai Polytechnical University. Shanghai Technical University. Shanghai Institute of the Applied Equipment. Shanghai University of Aquaculture. Shanghai Institute of Foreign Trade. Shanghai Sports Institute. Shanghai Accounting Institute Lixin. In Shanghai, the second largest library in China, the Shanghai Library is located. Science. The leading research establishments of Shanghai are the Shanghai University of Transport, Fudan University, the Tongji University, the Shanghai Institutes of Biological Sciences of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the Shanghai Institute of Organic Chemistry of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the East Chinese University of Science and Technology, the Shanghai Institute of Cancer, the East Chinese Pedagogical University, the Shanghai University, the Shanghai Technological University, the Second Military Medical University, the Shanghai Medical College of Fudan University, the Chinese State Institute of Pharmaceutical Industry, the Donghua University, the Center of the Best Practices of Neuroscience and Intellectual Technologies of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Other important research establishments of Shanghai are the Shanghai Institute of Microsystems and Information Technologies, the Shanghai Institute of Ceramics of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the Shanghai University of Traditional Chinese Medicine, the Scientific and Technological University of Shanghai, the Shanghai Institute of Technology, the Shanghai Institute of Applied Physics of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the Shanghai Institute of Technical Physics of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the Shanghai Pedagogical University, the Shanghai Academy of Agricultural Sciences and the Shanghai University of Power Industry. In Shanghai, 488 research centers created by the foreign companies are located. Among the largest, the centers and laboratories of the companies Dow Chemical, Tesla, Danone, Clarins, Fuchs Petrolub. Among the Chinese scientific analytical centers, the Shanghai Academy of the International Researches is in the lead. Healthcare. Leaders medical and research establishments of Shanghai are the Shanghai East Hospital of the Tongji University, the Shanghai Cancer Center of Fudan University, the 10th National Hospital of Shanghai, Renji Hospital, Zhengshan Hospital, East Hospital of Surgery of Bilious Ways, Rujin Hospital, the Shanghai Clinical Center of Public Healthcare, the First National Hospital of the Shanghai University of Transport, the Shanghai Pulmonary Hospital, the 6th National Hospital of Shanghai, Shugang Hospital, Huashan Hospital, the 9th National Hospital of Shanghai, Xinhua Hospital, the Shanghai Chest Hospital, Shansang Hospital, the Shanghai First Hospital of Mother and Child, Shanghai Hospital, Obstetric and Gynecologic Hospital of Fudan University, Children's Hospital of Fudan University. Others important medical and research establishments of Shanghai are the Longhua Shanghai Skorbo Hospital of the University of Traditional Chinese Medicine, Otorhinologicheski and Ophthalmologic Hospital of Fudan University, Jinshan Fudan Skorbo Universitäte Hospital, Yuan Shanghai Skoga Hospital of the University of Traditional Chinese Medicine. Astronomical phenomena. Last time residents of Shanghai saw a total solar eclipse on July 22, 2009. Before the total solar eclipse from the center of modern Shanghai could be observed on May 10, 1575. Also far Write comments. Read comments. Interesting people will tell interesting stories. All of good mood and good luck.